This is ExitUS, the podcast for the new American dream, moving abroad. I'm David Murphy. Since the shocking re-election of Donald Trump, millions of Americans have been in despair, depressed, not knowing what to do, and searching for an out. And we've seen enormous interest in searches for tips for moving abroad. But it's one thing to think of escaping to Canada or Europe or beyond. Another thing to know actually how to do it and to make that dream a reality. Now, I'm a former expat myself. My father worked for the State Department as a rule of law advisor abroad, something we may need here from those countries. And he brought me in Europe and Africa as a kid growing up. And I learned so much about how hard it is, but also how wonderful it is to settle in as an American abroad. And I want to take all of you along with me as I explore what it's like to think about moving abroad now as we face a new Trumpian future for America. Millions of Americans are looking at how they would actually implement this desire to move abroad. And we're going to be talking to experts on legal factors for visas, for permanent residency, for even citizenship in Canada, in Europe, in other countries and other regions around the world, for tax considerations, for cultural considerations, for a whole range of logistical and emotional and relationship impacts on what it is to think about moving abroad, away from one's friends, one's family, into a new culture, becoming the immigrant oneself, something that other countries may not want as they're having anti-immigrant sentiment, just like the U.S. too, and how you can actually practically pull this off if you're not able to just go out and do an investment and get what's called the golden visa and sort of buy your way to residency or citizenship abroad, how you can network your way to a job with a foreign multinational and or bring your business abroad and actually make it a reality. So we have a lot to explore, and we're going to take it day by day and help make this possibility real for everyone and help each other along this treacherous but exciting path ahead. So, thanks for being with us. I hope you'll subscribe to our mailing list. Check it out at ExitUspodcast.com. That's ExitUS podcast.com. And be sure to subscribe so you'll get a feed of all our exciting episodes we have coming up. Today, for our first episode, I'm very excited to say we have a Canadian immigration attorney who's going to demystify the process of looking to our neighbor to the north. His name is Ryan Rosenberg, and he's the managing partner and co-founder of Larlee Rosenberg, a Vancouver-based Canadian immigration firm, and also the creator of trumpugees.ca, a new site he launched on Wednesday, the day after the election of Donald Trump. So, without any further ado, I'll take things over in just a moment to that conversation. But again, please do subscribe. We have an exciting next episode coming up with Doris Spear, the president of a group called the Association of Americans Resident Abroad, ARO, which advocates for and helps American expats all around the world. So you'll want to be sure to hear that conversation as well. And then there's so much more coming down the line too. Again, this is the Exodus podcast, and we are your guide for the new American dream of moving abroad. And now, our first conversation. Well, Ryan, thank you so much for joining us. Ryan Rosenberg, managing partner of Larlee Rosenberg. We're so grateful to have you on the show. And, I think so many Americans have, talked at kitchen tables over the decades, jokingly about moving to Canada. But now many people are facing it with a new fervor.
And, the fact is, despite, the closeness of our two countries, it's one thing to talk about it. It's a whole other thing to actually figure out how to do it. So thank you so much for making the time here.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me on. It certainly is a dynamic and interesting moment.
And tell us about your firm and also the new initiative you launched just the day after the election.
Sure. Yeah, Larlee Rosenberg is a Vancouver-based Canadian immigration-only law firm. We're the largest immigration-only law firm in British Columbia, perhaps outside of Toronto. I don't really track it that carefully. Our lawyers provide a wide range of Canadian immigration solutions for clients from around the world. A lot of our practice is helping companies bring in and keep key staff in Canada. We also do a lot of litigation, family class sponsorships, and a little bit of white glove service for ultra high net worth individuals and people who are politically exposed. So it's a very diverse and interesting practice. It's taken me around the world. I've been at it for over 22 years now, and it's a wonderful way to practice law.
And on what I guess you saw where things were headed, so you were ready the day after election to launch a new site, weren't you?
Yeah, so this actually goes back quite a bit further. So my first election cycle as a Canadian immigration lawyer was when Bush II was running for his second kick at the can. And at that time, leading up to the election, I was on my first big overseas marketing trip. I'd spent 30 days in Asia, and I came back in early November to a voicemail box, an inbox full of messages from blue state Americans wanting out. And around that time, an email was circulating because back then, this is like pre-memes, right? We used to share funny emails with each other. And I had this email land in my inbox calling the Americans who were sneaking over the border with cases of Merlot in their trunks of their cars, mostly academics from California and the like, calling them Bush UGs. So that's where the UG suffix seed was planted in my mind. And, it was interesting. We contacted a bunch of these prospective Bush UGs who left messages, and some were interested and some weren't. And then as the election cycles continued, we continued to see a spike in interest at every turn. And, watching Obama come in after Bush, we ended up with what we call the Obama UGs. And this was a very different crowd. These were mostly the libertarian types from places like Incline Village, Nevada, who don't like paying taxes and don't like gun control and don't like socialized medicine and don't like, at the time, same-sex marriage. And they just wanted to come to Canada. And I was really interesting because, of course, that's what Canada is. And I actually spoke at a conference back then called Escape from America. I spoke after the Prime Minister of St. Kitts and Nevis, and I think before some Foreign Affairs Minister from Panama. And it was a very libertarian crowd. And the first question I got after giving the Canadian option was from some guy in the front row with a heavy Texan accent. And I'm not going to try to copy it, where he said, his question was, so do you folks believe in socialized medicine? And I had my answer ready. Because I've been working the room, the days leading up, meeting people. I said, yeah, well, in Canada, we measure the profits of our healthcare system by the health of our nation and not the depths of our doctors' pockets.
What a concept.
The whole room shook their head no. And I left without a single client. So it was a very interesting experience.
Well, I think
Moving on.
the trumpugees, refugees market might be a higher prospect.
Yeah, so like this UG suffix is still in my mind, and leading up to 2015, when Trump put his name forward to be the Republican nominee, it was in that moment, so before he had the nomination, that I bought the domain name trumpugees.ca. And at the time I was super busy with all sorts of things, and watching him win, I thought, well, great, I have this website. I had no idea how to build a website. I'm not a tech guy at all. And I was doing fine in the rest of my practice and wasn't really looking to do anything, any big marketing push or anything like that. So I kind of let the domain name lapse. And I kept on getting these renewal reminders. And I kind of looked at them and it was like only $9. I'm like, okay, I'll renew it. And then when the last renewal came in after Biden came in, I just let it lapse. But then, leading up to the election, it was still in the back of my mind. And on the morning after, the phone calls were coming in. I went right back to GoDaddy and I repurchased the domain. And now the technology is so wonderful. You don't need to be a tech person at all. Using AI, which I've integrated a lot across my practice, you can build a website. So from the moment of purchase until the moment I published, trumpugees.ca was an hour.
I love it.
So it was over a cup of coffee. I got this website up and running. At the same time, an old contact of mine at the Canadian Press, he used to be with the South China Morning Post, and we just reconnected on Twitter, and he took some interest in the election results and what this meant for Americans coming up. So he ended up sending a reporter my way, and we did an interview on I think it was the Thursday. Yeah, it was a Thursday. And by the time that piece was published, it was picked up by the major news outlets in Canada, the Globe and Mail, the National Post, La Presse, a bunch of the local outlets, even some of the really small markets. I guess they licensed the article from the Canadian Press. And my website sort of took off, and we've been getting a super high volume of interest from Americans who are just, they want to explore their options. And the really interesting thing is, a lot of people assume that I'm getting my share of hate mail too. I'm getting people saying, "Well, we don't need any of these blue-haired crying liberal types in Canada. Why are you helping them? You're a moron," that sort of thing. But the truth is, the types of people that are reaching out are certainly left of Trump on the spectrum, but they're not far left. There are some of those for sure, but there's a lot of space between Trump in the middle and the left. And that's a wide scope of people who are just, this might be the straw. Something, if they've already been interested in looking elsewhere, wanting that expat experience, or perhaps they're feeling that maybe America's heading in a direction that they're not comfortable with for all sorts of reasons, with Trump being, again, the straw that broke the camel's back. They're reaching out to us too. So we're seeing data scientists and professors and teachers and nurses, all sorts, who are looking to make the move north of the border.
Now, it's one thing if you work for a multinational and you can transfer to another office, but it's a whole other thing if you're your own, career professional looking to move without the help of the company, or you're an entrepreneur, or you're a retiree. I mean, it's one thing to say you want to move to Canada, a whole other thing to actually do it. What do you tell people when you jump on a screening call, just how realistic this hope is?
So the timing of this surge is really interesting in relation to Canadian massive changes in the recent weeks to Canadian immigration policy. Canada is closing the valve. We're trying to stem the flow of immigrants into the country. We're actually remarkably on a population reduction course, where we're trying to reduce the number of temporary residents and new permanent residents in the country. So the line is getting longer, the bus is getting shorter. And what this means is that only people under certain circumstances are going to make it. And it could be some people who need to find work in Canada before they qualify, and maybe work in Canada for a couple of years before they qualify for permanent residence. But getting a work permit and bridging that gap can be easy, or it can be complicated if you're not well networked and don't qualify for a role in Canada. Some people who only want to move as permanent residents will probably not make it until they accumulate Canadian work experience anyways, if they're coming through one of our economic programs. We're getting a lot of people who are married to Canadians who are looking at spousal sponsorships right now. They've been living as a married couple in the States for 10, 20, whatever number of years, who are like, okay, now's the time. So there's some people who are going to have an easy go of it. Some people who are going to struggle, and some people we're meeting with, like, the advice we're giving is, you need to find a plan B. Either figure out how you're going to hunker down for the next 4 years, find another country, but Canada might not be in range for you.
I'm curious what countries you see people develop as Plan Bs. Do they find it easier and yet not a country that's even worse?
Yeah, so we really stick to our knitting here, and I don't really get too involved in brokering permanent residence or passports in any other countries. I mean, historically, Americans go all over. It's where the opportunity is. In my over 20 years of practice, I'll tell you that people only really move for two reasons. Real refugees aside, like if people are facing a risk of their life, yes, they're going to move to save their life. But aside from those legitimate refugees, people only move for two reasons, and it's love or money. People don't move for politics. By love or money, I mean you either have a spouse, a parent, a child, a reason to be together in a certain country, you'll move for that, or you'll have a job, and you're not going to, most people need that income, and you're not going to quit your job as a software engineer, DevOps engineer in Silicon Valley to not work in Canada. So that prearranged employment is a really, really important piece. Otherwise, people just won't do it. And the other piece on the money side, which has really been a deal breaker for most, especially in the ultra high net worth and high net worth crowds, is the tax consequence. American patriotism in this sense is protected by the pocketbook. The tax bill for expatriating can be significant. Canadian taxes might be higher than what Americans are used to in their home country, and they're just not willing to go through it. They'll look at the tax bill and they'll look at the election cycle and think, well, maybe I can wait 4 years, and that's what some people choose to do, and just for that reason alone.
What other big misconceptions are there when people first talk with you?
Oh, the biggest one from Americans is, I get these emails, so hysterical. I want to be in Canada by January.
January 20th in this case.
Yeah, right. Yes, it's November 13th today, right? And we get these calls like, I'm ready to get out. I want to move there tomorrow. Immigration takes time. You have to queue up. There are certain circumstances where you can get a work permit very, very quickly. But if you're talking about permanent residence, it's a long-term process. You're committing to a bureaucratic endeavor, and those rarely go quickly. So the biggest misconception is timing. The second is entitlement. Why wouldn't Canada want me? I have a high school education and I work in a warehouse. Like, I get calls like that all the time. And it's like, well, I mean, we do need all sorts of people in Canada, and it's I would never say anything disparaging, but our system is skewed towards high-skilled occupations with lots of education, lots of languages, preferably French and English, and ties to Canada. So just because you want to be here doesn't mean that Canada necessarily wants you right now.
So what I'm hearing is that people really do want to make their aspiration real to move to Canada. They really should start looking for a job. They really should be brushing up on their French first.
Absolutely. And the other thing that's different this time around with this election cycle is we're seeing more corporate interest, which is interesting. So especially in tech, where, like, I do a lot of work with tech companies, and I find that there's typically, at least in our practice here, a more diverse employee base in a lot of the tech companies we work with. And a lot of progressive companies want to ensure that their employees feel safe and happy, etc. And we are seeing companies establish Canadian subsidiaries to transfer employees to Canada. That's something that we're getting a lot of inquiries about as well. People wanting to keep their talent happy and engaged, knowing that they might leave or try to leave the United States anyways, so they might as well keep them employed. So there's certainly that opportunity in addition to the French and English and everything else.
That's certainly something where Vancouver particularly can come into play. If you're a California tech company, having an office in Vancouver nearby and in the same time zone would make a lot of
100%.
sense.
Yeah, and that's a big part of why Vancouver has such a vibrant tech scene. A lot of the really big multinationals use Vancouver as a visa play to move people from places like India through Vancouver and then into either Washington or California.
Sure.
And Vancouver being a sticky place, people Some people followed through and moved to the States from Canada because we had a more generous visa regime. Other people stuck around, and Vancouver's benefited immensely from it.
And Canada has its own evolving political situation, and some of the same forces we're seeing in America and around the world are evident in Canada too. Do you see it continuing to get just tougher and tougher to emigrate to Canada from the U.S.? I mean,
so I don't know that it's getting tougher. I think so. If you look at the levels plans for Canada, relative to the size of our population, it's really just a return to pre-COVID ratios. So I think that the most noise we're hearing about people upset with the change in level plans are all the international students who came here on the promise of staying long term. They're facing some very serious headwinds, and a lot of them aren't going to make it. But as far as immigration from the United States goes, the statistics don't really support any notion that Americans want to come in bigger numbers at election cycles or any other time of the year. And I think it comes back to that original idea that it takes a lot of our money to get someone over the border.
Sure. So stepping back, your advice for our listeners would be, before even worrying, it sounds like, about the immigration visa process, line up, what you're thinking through, what your actual practical path would be to, financial livelihood in Canada. And then it's almost like perhaps the visa process, with the help of the right, attorney, would be more likely to fall into place. I mean, you should be thinking about moving your company to Canada, opening an office there. If you're an employee, figuring out, can you transfer within your industry or within your firm? Do you have relatives who can connect to you? That's where people, almost as a first step, should be going, rather than deluging your inbox with even.
I think a lot of this stuff we're getting in response to Trump EGs is knee-jerk. It's like, that's it, I'm out of here. But yeah, like any problem you're trying to solve in life, start with where you want to end up before taking your first step down a path in any direction. Understanding what your life is going to look like here and getting to that is obviously a very, very important part before doing anything else. And then calibrate your expectations on timing and whether Canada even wants you right now. Those are really important, obviously, deal breakers for a lot of people.
Do you think it's easier or harder to move to Canada than the UK or France or Germany or other places people might have on the top of their wish list, their dream list?
Well, if you're talking about Americans, we have the benefit of the Canada, U.S., Mexico Free Trade Agreement. And through that free trade agreement, there's a lot of mobility for professionals and investors baked in. So you can really take advantage of those. I'm not familiar with the United States' professional mobility agreements with other countries and how easy that is. But I can tell you that as neighbors sharing a fence, some people in Canada say we may need a wall now, that it's probably easier to come up here than it is anywhere else. Culturally, geographically, economically, it's just a little bit more practical than moving overseas to somewhere further afar, different language, different culture entirely.
So a good time perhaps to plan a vacation to Vancouver or other cities people are thinking about, and just look around and think, do I see myself here? You want to test the waters and test the job market before going any further.
For sure. Just
And your time is very valuable. I know once people have started to think through just how realistic is this? Is it a knee-jerk reaction? Is it something they really want to do? I think it may be different this time, given that this is frankly a different level than what we saw with the Bush years and such. If people are ready to reach out or to learn more, are there resources you'd recommend, books, websites? How would they get in touch with you and your firm? At what stage should they be thinking of talking to you?
Sure. So when I met my wife, her father was an immigrant from, and he came to Canada in 1967. When we were engaged early 2000s. He was learning about what I do for work. And he's like, well, why does anyone need a lawyer? Back then, I just went to the embassy, and 2 weeks later, I moved to Canada. And Canada is yeah, exactly. If only. So Canada it's a country of immigrants. Everyone has their own story. Everyone has their own experience, and our law changes all the time. And I give that context to explain that there's really bad advice out there. A lot of people think, well, if I did it this way, then you could do it this way too. And it's like, well, you did this 40 years ago, and the world's a different place, and the rules are different now. So doing your research is really, really important. I think just as one shouldn't Google, a skin tag and think they have skin cancer or any other medical thing, you should really seek expert advice. And in Canada, lawyers, any lawyer who's a member of any of the provincial bar associations or law societies can provide advice. We also have another class of representatives called immigration consultants. These are licensed through a separate licensing body. And it was explained to me early in my career that, and I think it still holds true, the lawyers have a bigger grasp on the why and not just the how. And so if you want that full advice, there's some really wonderful lawyers out there. There's some really awful lawyers out there too. There's some really wonderful consultants out there, really awful consultants. When looking for advice, just, like anything that sounds too good to be true probably isn't. You see, there's all sorts of fraud and immigration scams, and people take advantage of immigrants all the time. So you really need to have your radar up. You shouldn't rely on things that you Google. Seeking professional advice is probably the best way to start your journey.
And what are some of the big pitfalls, or how would people want to think about evaluating a potential attorney or consultant that they're looking for? How do they evaluate someone?
Sure. Reputation is hard to earn and easy to lose. So I would say, work your networks, try to find your referral sources, try to get someone if you're going to work with someone, try to get them on a call, make sure you feel like you're actually valued as a client. You have a good rapport. You're going to be on a journey together. You can always look up a lawyer's disciplinary history on the provincial law society website. That's always a red flag. But at the end of the day, there's a wide range of like any profession, a wide range of capabilities, a wide range of fees. And it's just one of those moments where you just want to make sure that you're doing it right. I've heard that, you don't want to cut corners when it comes to your immigration advice or your surgeries. Like those are two areas where you want to make sure you have the right outcome, because at the end of the day, living your life and being stuck somewhere you don't want to be is a really horrible consequence if things go sideways.
Well, people are lucky to have experts like you guiding them on this journey. I'm sure maybe your voicemail box is not full these days. Maybe it's your email box, and you have many inquiries you need to get back to. So we'll let you get to them. And how can people learn more about your firm? It's the website.
Thank you. Visit us at larlee.com. LARLEE.com. And we have a contact us form there, or you can visit trumpugees.ca. And we'll get back to you if you reach out.
Fantastic. Well, Ryan, thank you so much, and Godspeed to you and your clients.
It was a pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you.